Good evening, everyone. My name is James Thompson. I'm the campaigns director with the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. Welcome to the third webinar that we're holding about warehouse sprawl here in the Garden State of New Jersey. This is going to be, again, the third webinar. And the topic for discussion today will be a presentation in reference to practices in organizing the New York community. This is based off of input and feedback from many of you who've attended the other two webinars that we've had in the past, and we will continue to get a take on other webinars and topics and regarding warehouse sprawl here in New Jersey that folks are interested in and want to see more insight and more information on. So I just wanted to just again, good evening. So for those of you who are not familiar with the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, we're a nonprofit organization that educates to protect our families and communities, and also to safeguard our natural resources. We also provide, the public policymakers and opinion leaders, with sound, objective information that encourages strong, equitable, and environmentally just solutions. I would also like to thank our sponsors and co-sponsors for the event for this evening, which includes the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. We actually have a presenter from the Pinelands Preservation Alliance that's going to be walking us through some of the steps that they've done in reference to engaging local residents around warehouse sprawl. We also have the New Jersey Highlands Coalition, ANJAC, which is the Association for New Jersey Environmental Commissions, as well as the New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Thank you to all of those organizations who've partnered with us and co-sponsored this event and help make sure that we were able to get the word out about this event as well. Next slide. So real briefly, I just want to go over some quick ground rules for today. We're anticipating that this session will not go longer than an hour. But with that being said, just some quick ground rules. We want to make sure that if you can, just make sure you change your name or have your name, put your name in the section. And there's steps that are in that show you how to do that. And the next thing is make sure that you're muted at all times. Sometimes people just generally forget that they're not on mute. And, sometimes we hear people cooking or having conversations in the background, and we want to try to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the next thing is the Q&A, the question and answer session, will be at the end of the presentation. If you do have questions, whether that's during the presentation or even after, please make sure to put the questions in the chat. Also within the chat itself, please, it's very important to be respectful, both to the presenters and also everyone else that's participating or listening in on the session. Please just be respectful as possible. And if you run into any technical problems, message the co-host, and we'll be sure to make sure that that we try to troubleshoot any challenges. And again, this webinar is being recorded. You may have gotten a notation in the beginning that it is being recorded, but this webinar is being recorded and will be available to the public. Next slide. Okay, so I will pass it over to Catherine Fisher. Catherine, it's all yours.
All right, good evening. So we at NJLCV are concerned with the community and environmental impacts of warehouse sprawl. So we have questions and concerns around stormwater management from the large concrete footprints, air quality from increased truck traffic, loss of farmland, loss of open space, and environmental justice issues. So this is the third webinar in our warehouse series. Our first webinar gave an overview of warehouse sprawl, and our second one gave a more in-depth look at how to get involved with your planning and zoning boards and to have more of a say in what projects can or can't go forward. So I see a lot of questions asking for the links to these webinars. These will be provided in a follow-up email to all attendees tonight. So this is our third webinar, and it's going to be focused on community organizing. So tonight, our speaker from Pinelands Preservation Alliance will talk about how they engage a community through the power of organizing around a potential warehouse project in New Jersey. And we will be sharing how you can do the same in your own community. Now, warehouses are going to continue to be needed, especially with higher demand for online shopping, but we can advocate for responsible siting and development of these projects. So I'm glad to introduce our speaker tonight, Jason from Pinelands Preservation Alliance. I met Jason at a community network event hosted by Pinelands Preservation Alliance, and he shared there how they successfully rallied their community around a warehouse project proposed to be developed in this beloved park of theirs in Egg Harbor City. So we're really glad to have him here in order to share what was successful in their organizing efforts. And speaking of zoning and planning boards, he is actually streaming in live from a planning board, so that is really good to see. So Jason is a public lands advocate with Pinelands Preservation Alliance, and he joined the staff in 2015. He is a New Jersey volunteer master naturalist and wilderness first responder. In addition to working as a public lands advocate and land steward, Jason creates film and video projects for PPA. One such project, Pinelands National Reserve Wilderness Remains, is a long-form, non-narrative film that documents the unique landscapes and ecology of the Pinelands. Jason is a board member of the Rancocas Conservancy, a senior fellow of the Environmental Leadership Program, and an avid canoeist, hiker, and wilderness skills enthusiast. So we're really glad to have him here to share what he's learned in his past experiences. So Jason, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. And, just to start us off on the right foot, if anybody's cooking, like James suggested might be happening, make sure you invite us over, okay? Because it's almost dinner time. But I'm here in Pemberton Township, and I know we at least have one or two people on from Pemberton. And Pemberton is really under siege right now with warehouse sprawl applications. There's also a project which is on the planning board docket tonight to bulldoze over 300 acres of pristine Pinelands forest, unfortunately labeled a regional growth area, and put age-restricted condos. So I'm here waiting for that to start at 7 o'clock at the Pemberton Township building here. What I want to start off with is the general themes that we'll be talking with tonight. We're going to talk about interest, we're going to talk about persuasion, and we're going to talk about power. These are the three things that we really need to consider when we're forming our strategy. So this specific case study is in Atlantic County in Egg Harbor City, where there was I'll call it a scheme to give away part of the city park to a warehouse and retail developer. So, when I got wind of this, I was personally activated. It was in my own self-interest to take this up. Also, because it was public land, it was also my job to take this up. And fortunately, I had access to a large network from living in that community that could be rallied. We do have certain advantages in the Pinelands, and we had even more advantages in this specific case, which I can get into. So keep that in mind. Each project will have its weak points and its strong points. You want to find the weak points of your opposition and exploit them as best you can. Next slide, please. So the general philosophical means that we're going about this, because we can't always count on having tens of thousands of dollars to hire land use attorneys, to hire planners, to hire special experts in traffic, et cetera. So the philosophy and practice by which we are accomplishing this, specifically in Egg Harbor City, but also in Pemberton, is through the grassroots, which is we are working together, we're building relationships, working together to find the ways to solve our own problems. Next slide, please. So just to start off with different frameworks. So those of us who are on this call who work for environmental organizations, we are operating within a hierarchy. We have a boss, they have a boss, and it ends with a board of directors and potentially a membership if it's a membership-led organization, which there are actually very few membership-led organizations. That organizational structure is actually very rigid. When we're working in a grassroots context, we're really working in an undirected network. So I don't have to tell every single person within the network what to do. If we can activate the network and work somewhat collectively, there can be spontaneous actions that don't rely on the bottom reaching the top of the chain or the top reaching the bottom of the chain, because there's many roadblocks and there's many inefficiencies within a hierarchical structure. But in a well-functioning undirected network like a local community, those points of conflict and inefficiency often are irrelevant, because there are multiple chains, multiple links, and multiple nodes within that system where power can be actuated without one person having to tell 500 people. Next slide, please. And that's just an actual network map. You can really look into the network science of this, but just wanted to show what an actual network looks like and all those connections. And if you're really a fan of naturalism, you can see that there are natural scenarios like how trees use mitochondria, use mycorrhizal fungi to direct nutrients. That's a network, and we're really using a network system to communicate information and direct power flows within our own community. Next slide, please. So you need to be able to get on this stuff early because it takes a lot of time to develop a strategy. So watching for newspaper public notices. If someone got a letter in the mail and they upload it to Facebook, they got the 200-foot notice, say, hey, there's some kind of redevelopment agreement. And most of these warehouses are being pushed through the redevelopment process. So having an eye out on what to look for, reading your local newspaper, staying up on social media and seeing what people are putting up, and having a forum to do that. So if you have a township webpage, encouraging people to be on there, whether that's a Facebook group or potentially a Discord channel or any kind of social medium, nextdoor.com, where people can actually upload and talk about these notices and really get that attention going. And then you can actually start to form a strategy if you realize there's a threat that's impending. Next slide, please. So a really key thing here is, I like to communicate that there is a series of steps that you can follow. And it's really important that you do follow those steps and really defining what your goals are, what your theory of success is, what your theory of change is. It's really best to write that down and be able to communicate that to your whole network, because if you all have a different strategy, a different theory of change, it's going to be harder to align and all move in one direction. Next slide, please. So, although I talked a lot about having a distributed network, it is really important for you to have a really strong core team that you can direct and work collectively with, host meetings with, and really form that strategy. I would encourage you to make that core team primarily composed of entrenched members in your community, people that have access, we call them nodes in networking, access to large parts of the township, of the community that you're working within. These people, they're going to be your core asset, because if you get everybody on the same page, you can spread your message, your narrative, and your strategy through those nodes. So I stress that you need that core team to be able to win. And in Pemberton here, they have a great core team, and we've been working with them a little bit. Next slide, please. So the other thing I would really highly stress is thinking about the imagery that you're using. We'll talk about media, traditional media in a little bit, but you need to have compelling imagery and compelling values for everything that you do. So an image is almost a value. If you have a beautiful place that's being threatened, being able to communicate that persuasively means you need imagery, both visual as far as a photograph, if you can, a video. But you can see in Egg Harbor City here, the newspaper used an image of the lake when the lake was drained, the Egg Harbor City Lake Park. So that image, that newspaper image, really isn't communicating all of the values that I want to portray to our audience. So I made sure I put the drone up and I got a nice, pretty photo of the lake to show why we care about this place. And really leading with that value is absolutely critical to success. Next slide, please. The other thing you need to do is pick your slogan. And my favorite messaging expert says that messages are like batons. They have to be easily passed from one person to another. So you have to have something that both resonates with the public and can be easily repeated, because just like in that undirected network flow, I'm not telling each township resident what to say. It has to be something that is said and repeated organically. So we got really lucky in this case, and I was able to pick through a deed from 1859, and there was a phrase that the city park of Egg Harbor City was to be available forever. It should be forever public, remain forever public. And that phrase is what we keyed on and honed in on and used to propagate our messaging. And of course, you want to tell people where you're working, Egg Harbor City Lake Park, and what the battle cry is, what the rallying call is. So we wanted to protect that park. So that's something you really want to spend some time on and get right, or at least as good as you can. Next slide, please. So you have your imagery, you have your core team, you have your call to action and your rallying cry. You also need a very simple narrative, and you need a place to demonstrate your power. This is a simple way of looking at it, but it's really important that you work with your core team to form your narrative. What is happening? And you can also use that narrative as part of a petition, which a petition isn't exactly going to change a decision maker's mind, but you're going to be able to collect email addresses, you're going to be able to collect phone numbers, names of people, and your message is going to be able to spread through the community through your petition. Next slide, please. You'll also need various platforms on which you can consolidate your network. So there's terms, there's recruitment, absorption. So and there's also your core team strategizing platform. So you need areas which to recruit within. So you see the Pine Barrens group there. That's where I was getting recruitment from, and I was absorbing them into a new group called the Friends of Egg Harbor City Lake Park. So you need to be able to recruit members and then absorb them. So you have access to put more detailed information, get more out of them by having a more consolidated area. So I know we've been talking a little bit about getting a Discord channel going specifically with warehouses, but we need to really flesh that out on this topic. But you need to be able to talk to both the mass public and your core audience. So those are two examples. Next slide, please. So memetics, or most people know these as memes, but memetic communications are the most effective way of communicating a simple message. So I did take some liberties here, and I found the ugliest possible version of a warehouse, which that's actually in Albany, New York. That's a warehouse in Albany, New York. And it's probably the ugliest warehouse that's ever been created. So, I took a little liberty and I photoshopped that over the drone image I took there of Egg Harbor City Lake. And it works. You give people a simple option. What do you prefer? And you get that out there. Maybe you link your petition in there. And you need these ways to both get attention and to spread your message. So thinking up having a bit of a roster of memetic communications is, again, super critical in the internet age, but really any age. This could easily be a flyer that you post around your town. Next slide, please. So, well, we can get to trolls in the question and answer side. That is an important question. So you can see this is an example of me not having to do everything, even though I was the primary organizer on this. If I was relying on my actions alone, basically forget about it. You need to utilize and leverage the power of the community. And if your communications are simple and effective enough, they will spread. People will spread them for you, especially if they're activated. If their self-interest is aligned with what you're trying to do, you won't have to do every single thing. The community will do it for you. We can get into why that is a little bit. When a community faces a threat, you can think of approaching a beehive or a wasp's nest. The beehive, just for instance, if I was to come over here by this honeysuckle and multiflora rose, if there's a beehive here, it wouldn't be bothered unless I started poking it. And we operate very much the same way, that we're not really going to be activated to do anything until we really feel that threat. So our communications should be designed to elicit that threat response in a real way, in an authentic way. And if there are people that have a self-interest, they're going to act. If they won't just respond to nothing. If you live in an area, you wake up, you hear in the newspaper that instead of a beautiful forest behind your house, there's going to be a 100-foot warehouse with shining lights, trucks moving all day. That is a real threat. That is intense threat to your quality of life. So the more people that you can activate like that, the better of a chance you're going to have. Next slide, please. So it's really important not only to utilize social media, but also make contacts and utilize the traditional press, because there is a level of authority that the traditional press still carries, and it's important you identify reporters who may be aligned with you on particular issues and keep them in your Rolodex. Now, if you're starting from the ground floor, you're not going to have that, but hopefully you can link up with some organizers, whether they're through LCV or other environmental groups like ANJEC, or if you're in the Pinelands Preservation Alliance, if you're in the Highlands Coalition, and try to pick their brain and see who would be best to contact as far as the traditional press goes. You could also use various local influencers but generally you want someone to be of your core team to be your spokesperson. It doesn't have to be a professional organizer, but it has to be someone that can effectively communicate a message. You'll know who those people are. Next slide, please. Again, this is another action. I didn't tell anyone to do this. Our message permeated the community, and we were getting spontaneous actions to defend the park. So, we talked about the digital domains, the traditional press domains, and I also think it's very important to still have a presence in the street, whether that be people knocking on doors, flyering, putting up big yard signs like this, getting that message out there to people that might not be reading the newspaper, might not be, on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, but also on the streets. So thought that was a nice thing that, someone just decided to put up this big sign out on the main drag there in Egg Harbor City. Next slide, please. So just a little comparison, again, we had an advantage here. I wasn't up against, or we weren't up against a sophisticated PR operation. So the image on the right is what the township backers put out on this, and the image on the left is my image of this project. And I'll just ask you, which one do you find more compelling? Which one would be more effective as a persuasive message to you? I think it's pretty clear. And the mayor actually used my my meme when defending the project at the big town hall meeting, which you'll see a little video of at the end. Saying how dishonest the disinformation campaign was used against this warehouse complex. Next slide, please. So having certain forums, certain avenues, meetings to essentially have a show of force. So whether that's a township meeting where you're pressing the township for a vote, you need to be able to demonstrate power. So if you effectively organize your community, you're going to be able to demonstrate power. And, in Egg Harbor City, the population is only about 5,000. So we got about 150 people to the meeting, and there are certain ratios that you need to show power, and that, within that township, that was enough. Next slide, please. And, when it comes to public comment or speaking to the press, people need to be able to tell their story. So why it's in their interest, why they care, and do so in a persuasive way. Just yelling at the township that they're, breaking the law, breaking whatever regulation, it's really not persuasive. To have people actually listen to you, and I know, that people say a lot that, it doesn't matter what stories people tell, but actually it does. We're really story-based animals. We operate on stories. So encouraging people to tell a story from the heart, why this situation is important to them, it is our most powerful tool in communication. So that's what I would encourage. Try not to have people go up there and just yell. Identify what their interest is, why they care, and get them to communicate that, and tamp down the emotion a little bit, but keep the heartstrings, but don't let people get too angry in front of the mic, because that really kind of shuts things down. Anger is useful. Anger is a useful motivator, but in public, we really want to be controlled and just tell a heartfelt story of why these issues matter to us. Next slide, please. So hopefully this video plays, but if you have enough support, and let's be honest here, if you have a township committee that it isn't actually corrupt, I mean, that is a real thing. If you have a township committee who's actually interested in doing the work on behalf of the people, they will be with you if you're able to show enough power, if you're able to be persuasive enough. So in the beginning, the township council voted 7-2 for this warehouse complex, and in the end, they voted 9-2 against it. And we could go ahead and play the video and see if this the sound works there. See, I'm not sure if that audio is coming through, but we could get the video to everybody. But basically, everybody gets up and says, originally I was for this, but given the response of the township residents, we're going to go ahead and vote against this project. And after this meeting, after this movement, we actually had a few members of our core team elected to township council. And that's really the thing I want to end on, that it's not necessarily enough to build a movement. You also have to consolidate power by taking elected office. And we don't talk about that much as 501c3 nonprofit. There's a little bit of a conflict there, but people really need to run for and hold local office. People that have the best interest of their community, you need to get elected. You need to get elected. So keep that in mind as you're building your movement. You should also be thinking about running for elected office. All right, so that pretty much wraps it up there. I'll let Catherine and everybody decide how we're going to do the Q&A.
Thank you, Jason. That was very inspiring, educational, thoughtful. It's got me ready to go back out and do something, for sure. And the other thing is, anybody that can stand at a planning board meeting and present at a webinar is good with me. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you for that presentation. So we're going to start the question and answer section of this webinar. I know if you want to put your questions in the chat, we'll be sure to go through them. But while we're waiting for folks who are putting their questions in the chat, Jason, I just kind of wanted to start off with a couple questions. So can you talk a little bit about the timeline beginning to end? And can you just highlight one or two lessons learned throughout that process? Because, one of the things that happens is you had mentioned, having a decentralized structure and having, a distributed structure where there's opportunities, more of a flat organization or organizing model, if you want to call it that. And that means, having a lot of different points of views, having a lot of different opinions, I think, but at the same time, having like the structural underpinnings that you would mention, having a spokesperson, having a good core group, having a strong message, some of the technical pieces and the know-hows that are necessary to be able to have a successful campaign. So can you talk about like what the timeline was and some of the valuable lessons learned throughout that process? And also one or two of the things that you thought was pivotal and being able to obtain a win.
Yeah, so the timeline, this was really an expedited campaign. This was only a month and a half. And, you're talking about issues where some of these projects can go on years in some cases. So this was an extremely expedited and really concise campaign that, because we had certain advantages, we were able to knock it out of the park just in about a month and a half. As far as, getting everybody on the same page, that narrative is really important. So if you can get that narrative, if you're first out the door on an issue, you have a huge first mover advantage. Not to bring up like a sore point, but like with the whale with the whale conflict, because that the disinformation operatives identified wind and whales and did that association, they have a huge first mover advantage on creating a causative, a narrative buy-in. So you need to be the first mover. So that's the thing I would say, that you got to be fast. So that's kind of like a broad topic, but that's
I know it all too well. But yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just look in the chat and see if there's any other questions. But in the meantime, while I'm waiting, let me just take a look real quick. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the actions that were taken to be able to mobilize? Like, was there anything in particular that you thought really was able to galvanize people to be able to demonstrate power? Because I think that's a lot of times people sometimes forget how important it is to be able to do that, So was there anything that you felt like was important to be able to do that? And we're talking like about a 6 weeks span of time. Within that 6 weeks, where did you see like the optimal moments to be able to be able to do any type of actions?
Yeah, the key thing there is, you can see people coming into the planning board meeting tonight, so we got a good attendance here too. But the key thing there is getting people angry and making people feel that threat response, because what your opposition will do is say, well, it's going to be nice. They said there's going to be a fishing pond for kids. They try to tone it down. They try to pacify. And what our job is, if we want to respond effectively, we need to be able to activate. And activation often means making people pissed off. So having that image of the warehouse, that horribly ugly warehouse over the beautiful City Lake Park, that's the kind of thing that gets people angry. And anger is just an incredible motivator, and having that threat response activated. So there are certain natural limits that, if you have an area that's a rural area and there's not many people that live there and there's not many people that go there, there's going to be a limit to how many people you can actually activate on an issue. So being able to create a broad scope, like the framing that we're using in Pemberton, is not only defend against these warehouses, but also to preserve rural life. So people that feel like their lifestyle is under threat, maybe they'll be activated, and you'll be able to build a larger movement. So really thinking about who has a direct self-interest in your cause is going to be really, really important, because you won't be able to motivate people if they don't feel that self-interest.
Thank you for that response. So I'm going to go straight to the questions that are in the chat, some of the questions in the chat. And I'll start with this one. And this is a really good question. And I want to preface asking this question because when the previous warehouse webinar that we hosted, the second one that was more centered around zoning board and planning board and town council interaction, a lot of times these projects happen. It's a slow process sometimes. But how do you fight a project? I don't know if you've seen this at all. How is a project fought from the perspective where the warehouse is zoned within as part of a master plan? The reason what I'm asking is, was this warehouse itself, how far planned in advance was it? And at the point where the local residents got wind of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, actually, it was in the works for years before we were actually able to start a campaign on it. And, it really comes down to when people start feeling that threat activation. And we just didn't have it until maybe a week before the planning board meeting where they were approving, they were going to rush through the redevelopment plan. So second part of that, when the project doesn't violate any of the zoning or they're not calling for variances, if it has, there's going to be certain projects that have very few weaknesses, and that's going to be a reality. There's going to be projects going to be harder to fight against. There's going to be projects that have more vulnerabilities that you can attack. And, sometimes it comes down to creativity, but if you're behind the game and there's very little vulnerabilities on a project, it's going to be tough. Not everything's going to be a win. That's the one thing we're going to say. There's going to be wins and there's going to be losses.
Exactly right. It happens quite often. Yeah. And the thing, I think one of the key things is that you have to stay steadfast. You have to stay resolute. You have to continue to push. There's going to be wins. There's going to be losses, right? But the next question that I want to ask is from someone in the chat as well. So I think that there's a host of different, but there are a host of different things, activities that can be done as far as like recruitment, of people who are supporting the campaign, different ways and tactics and techniques of being able to do that. And that's a broad array and a broad range of doing different things. So I think the question at hand is, were you able to do any type of door-to-door campaigning or door knocking, and like you show that there were some social media posts that were there, like the memes and things like that? How did you guys do? Was there a mixture of that? What did that look like? What did you think was like more effective than other pieces?
Yeah, there was door-to-door. There was door-to-door door knocking. We had flyers. I'm really not able to say exactly what aspect was more effective than the other, but the combination, all of those, put us over the top in a big way. I mean, we turned public opinion 100% against this thing. I mean, if you did a public opinion poll in town, at the night of that meeting, it would have been 90-something%, on our side.
Right, because sometimes it's hard to kind of pinpoint and put your finger on exactly what it is. But I think like someone with an experienced background such as yourself, because I want to go back to something like, do you think it's important to do a lot of different things? Some things you can measure, some things you can't, right? But can you kind of dig a little bit deeper about like why those different pieces are important, how they fit into the overall puzzle?
I could try. I mean, different people are going to respond differently. So I think that's the reason to go with as many outlets as you can. If I'm 55 and up, I'm going to be reading that newspaper. That's going to be influential to me. If I'm 30 and below, I'm going to be watching that TikTok channel, maybe if I'm a member of an immigrant community or another group not necessarily active online or reading the newspapers, I'm going to respond maybe to that door knock by somebody that I know that's from the community. So that's why, we're talking about when any town has so many different types of people who live within it, who access information in different ways. We just need to hit the the big numbers in as many ways as we can. If we can knock on 5,000 doors, let's do it. If our best method is getting out into social media, into the newspapers, let's do that. So utilize your strengths. That's what I would say. If you got people that are experienced at going door to door and doing deep canvassing with people, that's huge.
Yeah.
If you have people experienced with doing social media, graphic design, that's great. So use your strengths. That's my only recommendation. Use the strengths of your core group and the people you're working with.
Great. So I think the next question is more around what I call the eternal battle, right? One of the eternal battles in organizing. So when you're doing whenever you're campaigning or you're organizing, there's always a challenge around, making sure that, we're continuing to develop, volunteers and leaders to be able to do, to do as much as possible to maintain and grow the effort in the campaign. And so in light of that, is there anything that you felt like you've done either on this effort or other efforts that you think could continue to grow, cultivate, build leadership from that existing core and even grow the core itself, to be able to avoid potential burnout or overburdening existing activists?
Yeah, this is a big question, and the way I'd put it is if you make it fun, even if you're dealing with something that's can be stressful, if you make it a communal process, if you're working together with people, you're working collectively. So the thing I would suggest there is actually looking at if you're on a really long-term issue, making sure you're still having fun with people, going out for, drinks or seltzer or whatever. Make it fun. Make it fun for people.
I like seltzer. I like seltzer.
Yeah, me too. I'm a seltzer drinker. So, in this, I'm getting kind of broad here, but in this age, we do have a lack of social connection. So making it something that's renewing, not that we're just beating the head against the wall on some impossible issue, but that we're working together, we're trying to figure out solutions, we're doing it cooperatively. It's kind of like sports, make it a team effort. And I think everybody will have a good time. And if it's fun, you won't get burnt out, So that's the way I'd look at it. And I know that this question could go way bigger than what I just shared, but that's the way I'd look at it. If you're on a big issue, make it fun. People will come back. I mean, can't turn down having a good time.
Okay, thanks for that. And so another question is regarding you. I know you had mentioned this question is more centered around towards the end of your presentation. I thought was the end, but you had mentioned it's important to have community members and activists who are running for office. How do you, if it doesn't happen at that time, like, because everything happens in cycles, right? Like we have primaries coming up, and then in the fall we have a general, and then the next year is another thing, and another thing after that, and another thing after that. So, constantly going. How do you think, in between all of that, what are steps and things that community members and activists can take in between those moments, to be able to build power for, overall in a local community?
I would say the big thing is being a part of the community, being a resource, being someone that shows up to events, offer to volunteer with local community groups. Sometimes you need to do fundraising, just being a part of that community. Some people are really good at that. They can show up, they can just join the crowd. If you're in the in group of a town, you have power. So you're going to those township events, making sure you're going to township meetings, meeting the people who go to township meetings, meeting the city council, meeting the planning board members, taking them out to dinner, making sure you are actually a part of that network sets you up for success down the road. Because if you come in as an outsider, you're not going to have much influence. So making sure you're an insider, I think, is the best advice I could give there.
No problem. That was really good advice. There's a lot of folks on here that are asking a lot of really good questions. So we'll continue to keep the questions coming. Just a quick note, time check. It's 6:49. I think we can do maybe one, maybe two more questions, and then we just want to make sure that we're able to close things out. But I usually like to make sure, like I say 7 o'clock, we want to make sure that we respect people's time at 7 o'clock. So let me just go ahead and just ask another question. So how do you make important connection and issues with other organizations? I think so. I think what the question is more like, were you able to connect with any local community-based organizations in that effort? Because like kind of going back to the community web that you had talked about, if you want to call it that, right? There's different networks and being able to tap into those different networks. Were there any identifiable organizations, whether it was this effort or others, that you think were important on your experience? And then more theoretically, do you think that that's an important thing to be able to do?
Yeah, I mean, short answer, yes, absolutely. And the more community-based the organization, the better. Now, certain organizations, they're not going to go against the establishment. So you got to keep that in mind, that there are going to be organizations that are subservient to the establishment who may be pushing the thing that you're against. So they're not going to come out against it. If there's an organization that's dependent on government funding, forget about it, basically. So you're limited there a little bit sometimes with looking at different orgs, different groups that are operating, essentially as the establishment, Rotary clubs, things like that. So, it's going to vary by community, but yeah, if you can find organizations that are tied in, that are not necessarily subservient to the going trend of what the mayor or, the county commissioner wants, then you could use them. But if they are tied in, if they are going to be subject to potential repercussions of going against the establishment, then you're better off keeping them informed, but not really relying on them for anything.
Okay, thank you for that, Jason. So any closing comments? Well, first of all, thank you again for not only the presentation, but this discussion. It's got my juices going, right? Like, because it's, a 25-year-old guy like myself, it just takes me back. But thank you again, Jason, for doing it. Any closing remarks or comments you'd like to make before we move towards the end?
Yeah, I just want to say that I really sympathize with everyone who's dealing with this situation, this warehouse sprawl situation, because I understand how deeply it affects your quality of life, and that if we can start building a movement to not only deal with the warehouses, but also all other forms of, pollution, environmental justice issues that are impacting New Jersey residents, I really think we're on to something here. So I hope we can not only do educational webinars like this, but organize for collective power and build a movement towards bigger goals. So I appreciate everybody.
Let's do it. Okay, thanks, Jason. Catherine, back to you.
All right. Thanks again, Jason, for presenting to us tonight. It was really, really inspiring. So, and thank you everyone for your questions in the chat. It's been super engaging. So we're in a virtual room full of motivated people from all over New Jersey. So if you're interested in organizing or interested in reaching out to your community, this room is a good place to start. So I'll be dropping a Google survey in the chat. So it will be asking questions about where you're located, if you're interested in volunteering, and other ways you would like to get involved. I know Jason mentioned we were looking into using Discord. Right now, we're looking into what platform makes most sense. If you have any feedback, we would love to hear it. But we would want to connect with everybody on here about ways that we could organize together. So there's some questions about where you're located and if you're interested in volunteering. So please take a minute to fill that out. And I just dropped the link in the chat right there. Another note, so we will have these webinars and continue having them in this warehouse series. So we would love to hear your input about what other topics you'd like to hear about. So definitely feel free to drop in the chat any suggestions for topics that you might have. We're looking to potentially do one on legal battles and how to work with that. So if that's something you'd like to hear, please let us know. But if you have any other ideas, we would love to hear them too. So feel free to drop some suggestions in the chat. Also, another thing, if you don't have the time to get involved with this work or any time to get involved with activism, another great way for you to support this work is by donating. So our members really do drive our work, and even $15 can go a really long way with what our team can actually achieve. So we will be dropping a link in the chat for you to donate to our organization. So whatever way you'd like to be involved with us, whether it's donating or whether it's getting involved with our activist program, we really do appreciate it, and it goes a long way. So let me just drop that link in the chat as well. All right, James, do you have any other closing thoughts?
No, I think we're good to go.
All right, amazing. So let me drop this link in the chat real quick. I will also include all the information in a follow-up email. But yeah, once again, thank you everyone so much for attending. It was really stimulating, and we will be plugging all that information in a follow-up email. So thank you and have a good evening.